Welcome back, Aces fans. We are talking about the fuel system part of this whole thing. Instead of just talking about the one that's in the Blazer, I want to go over all the systems we got. So I want to give you this lovely introduction, talking about all the different fuel systems we got and what we plan on doing in this video series. See, fuel system. And then we're going to chapter it out in this video to cover each one of the systems that we offer here. And hopefully that helps you out. So what I'll do is we'll dive into it. We'll talk about the systems. I'll do a little bit of artwork behind me here on the board, and hopefully you get all the information you need. If not, like always, just put it in the comments. If we need to make another supplementary video to this, going over something that you haven't done yet, let us know. We really don't mind. I mean, that's why we make this stuff, for you, the people. So let's get into this fuel stuff. So here we're going to start on our fuel adventure today in this video with the tank conversion pump. Almost forgot what it's called. You saw that. So with the tank conversion pump, this thing right here already has an internal regulator of 58 psi. It's right here in the top. This is a really neat one though, because you can take this regulator out, plug it off, and still use it with a return regulator or a bypass return, depending on your application. This is one of the more flexible units we have when it comes to that. You can get it to about 12 inches deep, maybe 14 inches on a good day. You know, when it comes in here, it already comes with the appropriate 340 liter per hour pump or 255, depending on which generation you buy. The return lines as well. So we have one right here for vent, which doesn't have any kind of an adapter on it. We got the one right here that is like a kind of like a return situation. And then we got the other return right here. So if you're using it in a different configuration that requires you to use this return port, then this would be the return. So a lot of flexibility in this. With this system right here, you're going to cut about a 4 1/8 to 4.5 inch hole in the top of your fuel cell. This is really designed more for fuel cell applications, or if you have an old steel tank and you want to do the modification, you can just cut a big old hole in the top of your tank, but you have to use this ring right here. This is the mounting ring, which, as you can imagine, goes up on here, seals to the bottom of it with this O-ring, this nice green O-ring, seals up real nice. Then it has this closed cell foam in here, kind of like a neoprene type material. So there's this ring right here that goes inside the tank. You can see it split, so you can actually get it down in there. You put the foam on top of it. You make sure all the studs go through, no problem there. And then you, into this, and then you just go through and work each one of these bolts in with this right here to capture the top of the tank. Now it can warp a smidge whenever it comes to the corrugation on top of the fuel cell itself. Like if you got a stock factory tank, you know, it has that little, looks like the bed of a truck back there kind of. But yeah, it can bend to that and seal up pretty nice. So you'd mount this ring into the top of your fuel cell, and then you just install your pump through it. Like no problem, just like that. Put a few captive nuts on there, not a big deal. They have anti-rotation devices, so they're not really gonna like shake themselves loose or anything over time. But you get it mounted in there, you get it about a 1/2 inch off the bottom of your fuel cell itself, no big deal. And then everything else can happen. So you can go from this piece right here, straight out of this pressure port right here, which is regulated to 58 psi. No need for a return because it does it all internally. Hit a filter, go to your fuel injection system, and you're set. So, I mean, you need a little bit of power, but this thing only runs, I think, about 9 to 12 amps-ish. So you can actually run our system directly to this, ground it appropriately, and you're in business. This is simple. The biggest thing you have to do is get the depth right and cut a hole in your tank. So other than that, not too difficult. You notice there's not a lot of stuff that comes out of that kit box. We didn't bring the whole kit boxes because we already have some line for our 255 system and our tight fit tank system as well that we'll be going over later in this video. So when it comes to the fuel system itself, you're going to have your fuel cell right there. You're going to have this in-tank module that's going to be oriented about right there. It's going to come down. There's a fuel pump itself, the sock filter, and then, you know, your fuel level. This is 0.5 inch right through here. So That's about how this is going. Then you got your pressure line that's going to run out of here. It's going to hit about a 10 micron filter. The sock filter that's already on here counts as your pre-filter. So it's before the pump. It's going to take all the rust and debris and all that you're going to get in your fuel system over time. So we got our 10 micron filter here, and then it's going to go off to your fuel injection system. Whether you got a throttle body, you got fuel rails, or what have you not, you can deadhead this whole system into your throttle body. So, you know, TBI, there we go. We'll just say it's a kill shot, no worries. So this right here is going to be running at 58 PSI. And some of our systems are already preset for 58. Some you have to adjust in the handheld. Really easy business under the fuel selection tab. You just go in there to basic, you find, you know, injector rated pressure, adjust accordingly, and the system will take care of the rest for your fuel pressure needs. So this is the easy, from one point to the next, good to go. No worries. So there's not a whole lot of other mysteries with this particular system because it is so easy and basic, just other than you got to cut a big hole and get the depth right. And then make good selections for running your fuel lines around your vehicle. So up next, I will be talking about the Fuel Command Center, which is this thing's big brother in a way. So let me go grab that real quick and we'll get to talking about it. So anywho, we are back. A friend of mine commented and said he didn't like my plywood table. Look at my plywood table. It's to hold things. This is great. We're in a shop. I'm explaining things. It's not really the focus, is it? But we're back about the fuel systems here. We already talked about the conversion module, which is fantastic. A huge fan of that. But now, if you shrink one of those up just a smidge and give it its own fuel tank, that's exactly what you get in this right here. You can see it's just got hold down bolts, and if you take the top out of this thing, it looks just like the conversion tank. So you still get the return if you're going that direction. You still get the pressure, you still get the vent, all that stuff. It's whatever you want to be doing. But this thing has a few extra bits and pieces that I like quite a lot. You can mount it under the hood like this, standing up, looking good, running this off to your fuel injection system. This side right here or this side right here, whichever you want to do. You'll run it from your mechanical pump or an inline electric pump off your original carbureted setup into this to fill this tank up, this surge tank as it is. You fill this thing up, it takes the fuel pump inside, which I believe is a 340 liter per hour, really spicy pump, puts 58 PSI out to your throttle body or your fuel rails, no problem, and then you'll have a return on this side or this side, depending on how you have it set up, back to your fuel tank. Because this is just going to be feeding fuel in and it needs somewhere to go. And then this is going to take exactly what it needs out to go to the throttle body at a higher pressure, because it may be 7 to 14 pounds coming in here, 0 to 5 PSI coming out of here, depending on tank restrictions and whatnot, and then 58 PSI coming out of this right here on this red one, this pressure port. You can mount them vertical like this, which I'm a big fan of, but because of the bolts in the back, you can take the feet off this thing right here, unbolt them, put them here like this, and then mount the thing horizontally if you're real limited on space and that's all you can do. The only thing you need to take into consideration is that this is still pressure, this is still your fuel feed to fill the tank, but this one, whichever one is the highest point, needs to be returned, whether it's this direction or this direction. That's the biggest considerations you have to take. So also, if you want to get real fancy, depending on where the location is, you can take this gauge off and put the fuel pressure transducer in there and get all your fuel system pressure and actually feed it right into your kill shot or your Jackpot or whatever you're running. And then you just use the gauge somewhere else if you want to. And it's got a really cool Aces logo in there too. I like that a lot. So usually when I take these out when I'm doing an install, I just kind of like keep them in my drawer because I kind of like them. Just a thing I collect. It's really weird, I know. But there's that. Also, I didn't mention this in the last one, but this one right here, they still have a boost reference port, the 1-to-1. So if you're running this with a boosted application, you take a reference line off your throttle body or intake or what have you not, and run it to this, so every 1 PSI of boost pressure, you get 1 more PSI of fuel pressure out to your throttle body, keeping the injectors nice and even as it goes. So I'll draw a little bit of artwork back here explaining how these things generally hook up. and we'll go from there. So we're going to have your fuel tank. This is your factory fuel tank right there. You're going to have a line coming in. So this down here is going to be your pickup for your fuel tank itself. It's going to come out and it's going to go to your engine. That is a very square engine. But anyways, on the side of your engine, there is there's going to be like a bit of a mechanical fuel pump, right? It's going to have a few lines in it coming off of it and all that whatnot. This goes in here, and normally the mechanical fuel pump off the engine itself will go back up and supply the carb up here, right? So this thing would come around and supply the carb with about 7 through 14 psi of fuel pressure. So because we're getting rid of the carburetor and we want to go fuel injected, we're going to get rid of the carb and we're going to add some EFI on top of it. Right there. Finest of artwork. Anyway, so now we're going to put EFI on top of this thing. Let's say TBI. That's going to be my generic for anything ACES fuel injected related, unless we're talking about the Jackpot, which then we can just add some fuel rails to it. But same principle applies. You're going to have 58 psi coming out of this. So you go from your tank to your mechanical pump, and it's going to go over here to the surge tank. That is this guy right here. It's exact, right? It's the same shape. But we're going to have one port over, oh, my marker's messing up. One port over here. We're going to have a port right here, and we're going to have a port right here. This one right here is going to fill this tank up like so at 7 to 14 psi. It's just going to be free-flowing fuel in there, no problem, doing a good job. And then the pump that is inside of here is going to have a little socket at the bottom too. It's going to pick this fuel up and increase it to 58 psi. And it can go deadhead because it has the regulator built into it. Any return action it does is internal of this. So it's going to have like a weird combination of a bypass regulator inside of this thing, that's a regulator right here on top. That guy. So, anywho, so we got 58 psi going back to the TBI unit. No problem, set it up in the handheld. We got a Kill Shot Classic, it's already set for that. We got a normal Kill Shot, we have to adjust it a little bit. We got a Jackpot, we got to adjust a little bit. Not a big deal. Even if you don't adjust it, it's only a marginal difference in fueling, which it will learn out eventually. It won't change the pressure for you, but it will compensate the fuel in the right areas, if that makes sense. But anyways, we got the return. The return is going to come out, and it's going to go back to the tank, to preferably somewhere low in the tank so it doesn't cavitate the fuel. I'll even put little wavy lines in there. This right here is return. And it should be nowhere beyond 0 to 5 psi of restriction. Sometimes people will put these things in and it'll act real funny and do stuff because they have like 30 psi of restriction on the return line because they took it to the wrong port over here, which is a rollover valve. And it kind of turns into a really neat shower inside, but has a huge amount of restriction. So even though there's a big 3/8 line on top of your fuel tank, make sure it's not for a rollover valve because that will, weirdly enough, make it run funny and give you a little bit of a headache doing the setup. But hopefully that makes sense. Your factory fuel system up to your mechanical pump, no problem. It could be an inline electric pump, also not a problem. That's going to feed this and fill the surge tank up. It'll get regulated to 58 psi that goes off to your fuel injection system, and the return line goes right back to the tank. It runs under the same amperage range, about 9 to 12-ish amps, so not a problem. You can hook your orange fuel pump wire right over here to the positive leg, and you can take this and ground it, preferably to the battery if you don't mind, but a good ground source, and it'll sit there and do its job. So with that, that really sums up everything that's going on with this particular unit. There's not a lot of extras. There's no weird mysteries about it. It just, if you got it horizontal, you need to make sure there's a port that's going full return back to the tank that's the highest point. Otherwise, it'll get a little bit of air in there. That's it. Everything else is pretty easy. So I've seen people mount them on frame rails. I've seen people to put them horizontal or vertical on firewalls and a bunch of other really weird spots. I even seen somebody put one in the trunk of their car and then run a line all the way to the front of their vehicle, which they had no issues with. So they kept it all real tidy back there in the trunk, which if I was doing that, I'd just go with the fuel cell and use the other kit. But hey, it's up to them. They're going to be doing this. It makes more sense to them. Let them do it. It's totally fine. We're just here to support it, give you as much information as we can about it. Really neat thing is if you take the top off of this to inspect it, to maintenance it or whatever, it doesn't void any warranties removing these screws and taking the top off. So that's a huge benefit. We're not be like, oh no, you touched the screw, we can't warranty it for you. It's like, oh hey, I took it off and I found this issue, or I found this thing, or what can I do about this? Because later you may decide to put a bigger fuel pump in here, modify it accordingly, and put the lid back on it. And that's up to you to do if you want to. So it's just a normal old in-tank fuel pump is the normal size. I mean, you really want to measure the diameter, but yeah, we give you guys a little bit of freedom with this unit. Big fan of it. So with that, if this is making sense, if I explained it well, let me know. If I didn't, let me know. And I can always come back and do either reshoot this section of the video or just make a more in-depth explanation of what I got going on here. But hopefully we can film in the future a lot more examples. Hopefully I'll get the chance to do an install video on one of the ACES test units on how I like to hook it up and some of the things that I go through with when I'm installing these. So we'll get on to the next portion of the system. It's time to start talking about fuel pressure regulators, lines, and inline fuel pumps. So hang out with me for a few. We'll get into it. Segment 3 of this fuel system video. I'm so excited to be making these things because it's information that the people need, and it's epic. And it's not often that I get the chance to just really sit around and explain this stuff. I mean, other than in-house and a couple short YouTube videos, but let's get to talking about the tight fit in-tank fuel pump. This is going to be kind of a, you know, if you got an EFI aftermarket tank for your 1972, whatever it is, it's going to have 6 bolt holes in the top of it. See that guy right there? It's going to be the same bolt pattern as the majority of the tanks that are out there that are EFI conversion tanks. So you should be able to get one of these for your EFI conversion tank, figure out the depth, cut these things appropriately, get the hose just right, and just send it. So this is also one of those nice closed cell technology sock filters too, so it does a really good job of not collapsing, not getting clogged up too much. And if it's in the fuel in a few different spots, it can actually pull the fuel through nicely without starving the pump when you're super, super low on fuel. So this thing right here doesn't have an internal regulator because there's not enough room in the top of it. But we did throw some option in. So you can see on this one right here, we have, this is the return side. Comes with a nifty little cap. Over on this side, we got the vent. We keep an AN cap on there because some people already have like a vented cap or some other means of venting their system. But if you don't and you just want to get an AN fitting and a bit of fuel hose and run it to be your vent, you sure can do that. Also, this is the pressure out. So it picks it up from the bottom of the tank, depending on your depth, like 12 inches like this, sends it out, and this is full authority of this particular pump. Now this is a 255 liter per hour pump, your standard issue in tank 255, good for EFI, up to about 600 horsepower. So all these fittings are -6 AN on all of our stuff. So that's keeping it fairly universal. You know, 3/8 line or a -6 line, -6 fittings. These are ORB on this side and AN on that side. If you ever had a different fitting you wanted to put it in here, not a big deal. It's just an ORB. O-ring boss. That's what ORB means. But yeah, so this thing right here has already got the pre-filter in. You need to get 10 micron post filter as close to your fuel injection as possible and run it through. So I have a bit of hose here. Let me put this down, and a regulator. This seems to be a bit of a thing for a lot of folks on getting the regulator set just right. Let me push my card around a little bit and really help the camera guy focus. But anyways, so for instance, you see this long, let's get it flipped around correctly. This long bit of hose right here is actually coming out of the return. So these ports on it, this fuel pressure regulator, it's adjustable and has boost reference. It has a 1/8 MPT threaded area right here for the gauge, or our fuel pressure transducer. And actually most pressure transducers on the market will also thread into this as long as they're 1/8 MPT. Not a big deal, right? So anyways, let's see if no, I actually tightened that one. I was going to unscrew the thing for you. But you can have pressure coming in here, or pressure coming out of here, or pressure going in here or out of here. These are I and O on each side. So depending on how you got it arranged, as you can see, this was set up in a return style. So if on a return style, that would be fuel pressure coming out of the pump, going through the filter, through the rails, through the throttle body, or whatever setup you got. Like if we was to do it on the Blazer, it would go through the rails and then come back through this line right here to a regulator, which will be the restriction in the whole system, where you adjust your fuel pressure at. If you want 43, you adjust it for 43. You want 60, you adjust it for 60. I made a tech short on this here recently about adjusting this. So for every roughly half turn of this in, you're going to get about 5 psi of either more fuel pressure or less, depending on if you're going clockwise or counterclockwise. With the rotation of the center pole right here, this nut right here is just a jam nut. It keeps it locked in place so the fuel pressure doesn't wander around. This line right here needs to be restriction free going back to the tank, and I'll draw it out here on my fancy board behind me shortly, but 0 to 5 psi, that's the magic number. 0 to 5 psi is acceptable for a return line. If you have restrictions, check to see what the restriction is. So if you have one of these that's stuck at 80 or 90 psi and you can't adjust it, check for restrictions. That's probably the situation. So this is return all the time. Most pressure regulators on the market, including ours, returns on the bottom. A lot of times they're laser etched. This one is not, but this is return back to the tank. This is pressure coming from the system, and then in a return style like this is set up, this would be plugged off. So you take this out, there'll be a little Allen plug that goes in there. It's an ORB fitting, and then this is the restriction, returns the tank. Now, if we were going to draw that out, I'll do that. I'll just draw it out, then I'll erase it, and we'll go on to the next configuration of it. Too easy, right? So we got intake fuel. Let me draw my fuel cell right here. We got the tight fit intake. We got fuel pump right there. We got that right there. Fuel pump, FP, right there. Anyways, we're going to be coming out of the red one, which is going to be putting fuel out. So we're going to go this direction. There's going to be another filter. This is that 10 micron right there. And we're going to go into, let's draw fuel rails this time. I want to have a little bit of fun with this because I'm such an artist. We're going to have fuel rails right there. There's going to be a crossover connecting them. This actually looks more like a spaceship than anything else, but it is what it is. So our fuel system will go right here. The fuel is going to go through this system, this direction. It's going to go through the crossover. It's going to come back through the other side of the fuel rails, where it's going to encounter the fuel pressure regulator. FPR. There we go. So this side right here is blocked off. This one has a barb fitting in there, so you just use your imagination, really. And then our fuel return is going to come out of the bottom, and it's going to go back to the tank, to the bottom of the tank. You want your fuel returns on these type systems to be in the bottom, because if it comes in at the top, it's going to actually just drop the fuel in, which will add some air to the system, which could cavitate your pump in a high horsepower application, cause some damage to the pump and or the system, causing fluctuations in fuel pressure. Yeah. But comes out of the tank, comes out of the pump, hits the 10 micron filter, goes through your rails, comes back around, hits your fuel pressure regulator, which we adjusted to 43 psi, 43.5 psi right here. That's what we got this one adjusted to. Too easy, right? It's anything else is going to come. This is the pinch point. This is a restriction, so it's going to be at 43.5. Anything else is free flowing the best it can from 0 to 5 psi back to the tank, where it's just going to gently go into the fuel that's already in the bottom of the tank. With it, they usually call this a dip tube, DIP tube, because it dips into the fuel. A lot of times people use like bulkhead fittings and AN lines and all that. Whatever means of return you got is going to be good. Preferably you're returning the fuel below the level of the fuel. That way it doesn't splash around and aerate the fuel a bit. So that's the return style right there. This is a return style setup. We got a pretty good graphic in our manual, but the next variation of that is just a little bit different. So let me get the eraser out and I'll draw you a whole nother thing. And this actually applies to not only this tight fit, but it applies to the inline pump. Let me grab that inline pump real quick. Please hold. So if you're not going with an in-tank setup, you're going to be using this setup right here. This is just inline. Actually, I got it backwards. So it goes this direction. Fuel goes that way. This right here, good tested good. This is just one of the tester ones I had laying around. It's got some damage, but it works good. Anyways, this applies to this and this for both of these style setups. The only difference is this one's in the tank, this one's inline. So not too different, but some folks may get confused because one's outside the tank, one's inside the tank. Principles stay the same. So with that, let me talk about the bypass return style setup. This is a bypass return regulator after all. So when you're doing a bypass return style setup, which this is almost set up for, you'll have pressure in, pressure out to your EFI system, which will deadhead to it, and then it's regulated and goes back to the tank. So all your tank business comes up to here, and then this goes off to your system, whether it's a TBI or fuel rails or what have you not. Not a big deal. So let me draw that out real quick. So we're going to have, we'll stick with the in-tank pump, but we got our fuel cell right here. We got this, we got that, little fuel pump action. Got a little sock filter right there. We got fuel level. And we're going to bypass return. So we still need a return. We got a return right here with our dip tube. We're going to go out of the fuel pump with the pressure. And then we're going to hit the fuel pressure regulator. I want to put it right about here. So here we got the fuel pressure regulator right there. So we got the fuel coming into it just like this. We're going to have the fuel coming back out of it just like this. Let's go all the way around the fuel tank to do our return. How about that? That way I don't have to jump any lines. So we got the supply to the regulator. It is regulated down, and then we're going to come out of the regulator to our fuel injection system over here. We're going to go back to TBI just to keep it fresh. That's deadheading into it. This line right here, because it's regulated at this bypass return regulator, is going to be 58 PSI if we adjusted it to that. Or we could keep it at 43.5. It's up to you depending on what your goals are. This right here at this return, it's still going to be 0 to 5 PSI. And this is going to be maximum authority of what that fuel pump can do. You also, this changes where you put your filter too, because a lot of times you want your filter, you can put it here before the fuel pressure regulator, but depending on where you mount the regulator, you want that filter as close to the throttle body as you can so that any debris inside the lines over time doesn't get clogged up in your injector screens, causing weird stuff to happen. So keep that in mind. You want your filter as close as you can get to the system as possible. It can be before it, it can be after it. It's not a massive deal. Preferably as close to the throttle body or close to the fuel rails as possible to protect those injectors. So this is a bypass return style. Not too bad, not too complicated. A lot of people kind of pipe it in funny, but this is it. If we're coming out of the tank with that, in-tank fuel system, hits this, returns back to the tank, no problem, goes deadhead out to your throttle body setup. Now, if you're doing, for instance, the inline pump, there'll be no pump here, and There will also be no sock filter here either, because you'd have to have a pre-filter. So you'd have your fuel pump before the pressure regulator, and then you would have your filter, your 100 micron filter, before it as well. 100 or 40, a lot of people use 40. It's, whichever one you're using. But this will be your fuel pump at that point. And this will be your 100 micron filter, and then you'd still want to put your 10 micron filter as close to the throttle body as possible. That's the variation between using a tight in-tank pump and an inline pump, is it's just literally moving the pump from in the tank to inline with it. It just has to be wired correctly. They have about the same amperage rating. This one's obviously a little bit beefier and heftier, and it does use a little bit more amperage. That's it. These are also louder. I like these because they're in tank. If you're in a pinch, you can buy this at the auto parts store. Just pull the thing out and replace it if it goes bad at some point. So not really too bad. I like these a lot better. These are just fine. I've used a lot of these as well. Not a big deal. So with that, I would go over the whole inline fuel system as well, but it's so closely related to this that it's not really necessarily worth talking about all the variations, because it'd be the same thing. The difference is this comes from the tank with a factory dip tube to supply the fuel. It needs to be gravity fed, where this one doesn't need to be gravity fed. So you want to have good supply of free-flowing fuel to the pump so that it can send it, because all aftermarket electric pumps are pusher pumps, not puller pumps. So if you're pulling the fuel out of the tank with one of these inline pumps, it will eventually destroy this pump, unfortunately. There's very few in this aftermarket industry pumps that will actually pull the fuel out of the tank successfully, because it's designed to do it, to push it up and it be EFI rated at the same time. You cannot use a lift pump before it. You can't use your factory fuel pump at 14 or 30 PSI to supply your 255, because of flow rating. It's not going to have a good through flow rating to be able to supply this pump with enough volume to get the pressure to supply it to your fuel injection system without huge horsepower limitations. Normally what happens is idles great, runs great, hit 3,000 RPMs, falls on its face, runs out of fuel. So that's kind of what we run into there. So has to be free flowing, has to be gravity fed, the lowest point possible. That's why I got the pump in the diagram down here, because you want it to be, this needs to be able to siphon feed in. It needs to be the lowest point on the tank, if not below the tank, you can get. Hopefully that clears that up. But we talked about return system, we talked about bypass return, we talked about in-tank, we talked about in-line, and some of the requirements. This one's another good one too. If you got a fuel cell, it comes with the same closed cell neoprene style gasket with the retaining ring too. So you can actually cut a hole in your tank or in your fuel cell itself and install this thing in the same method that you could with the other system, the conversion kit. So plenty of options. Hopefully this information does you guys good. I know we get a lot of questions about fuel systems, how to hook them up. We don't have good instructions for it. We don't have a diagram for it, what have you not. They do exist. Some of them are in the manuals. A lot of them are online under our documents section. But if this video helps you out, throw it down in the comments. Say thank you. If you got suggestions about the video that we can elaborate more on, let us know. We'll add it to the list and get after it. So, and questions. You got questions, lay it down in the comments and let us know. We're going to come back on one of our Tech Tuesdays and address these questions as well. Because somebody may say, hey, you didn't cover this. Either I'll make a video about it or I'll give you a good answer about it. So thanks for hanging out during the fuel section of the ACES video series. We're going to keep doing more and more installs for you, the people, because, well, you asked us to, and we really love doing this. So I'll see you around.